Yo, 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 it's your boy El Brujo del Bloque, and today we are going to do our very first book review, and I'm really excited to provide you guys with a review for this very interesting book, Hoodoo Mysteries by Ray Malbrough. Y'all ready for this shit? Because I'm not gonna lie, I was not very pleased, but let's get into it. When it comes to reviewing a book, I usually like to go by a number of things that I'm really looking for. I look at the history that the book is mentioning and check for its credibility. If the history is incorrect when a book is talking about history, it actually makes me question the integrity of the rest of the book. The next thing that I look at is the usefulness of the book. If the book is like 90% history and just like 20 pages out of a 300-page book just spells, then I really just question if the book is even useful. I'm also big on testing information just to make sure that the efficiency of the information provided, or in this case, the spells, are actually working, or if they do work, or if no one should really waste their time purchasing a book to see if it actually works. I do pride myself on the title of being a witch, and I have no problem, investing a couple of dollars to see if, a spell is actually going to work, or few spells are going to work within a book that is provided, just to save you guys the time and place of investing in a book that maybe is not even useful. The last two things that I really check for are language and bias of the author. Language is very important, and a lot of people tend to really ignore that fact when speaking about certain things such as African American history, Afro-Taino history, and things of that nature. To make sure that language is not portraying ATRs in a certain negative light that is untrue. I mean, not all ATRs, practice something that may be acceptable in other cultures or acceptable in other traditions, but realistically, it is not the place of other cultures or traditions to speak on things that have nothing to do with their culture or traditions. I'm big on completely calling out and holding people accountable when they carry over anti-Black spirituality stereotypes as well as anti-Black sentiments about Black culture. If you guys want my solid opinion on what I rate this book, I'm really gonna have to say that I rate this book a solid 3. Just so you guys know, I wrote down all of my notes on my iPad while reviewing this book, just to keep track of everything that I wanted to mention and give my reasonings why I don't recommend this book to be anything higher than a 3-point rating. I'm also gonna cite my information and where I got it from within the book. In chapter 1 on the first page, the author didn't acknowledge that Haitians, before they were enslaved, were Taino, and goes on to say that the indigenous religion of the Haitian people was voodoo. That is actually incorrect. When the conversation of indigenous peoples is brought up, whether of a land or people forget that before Haitians were Haitian, they were Taino, which still the same makes that many Haitians have a large percentage of Native American, in their blood. Just like Dominicans, just like Puerto Ricans, etc. While that percentage varies from person to person, the indigenous people of Haiti did not practice voodoo because they were not African. Voodoo came alive in Haiti when enslaved, keyword, enslaved Africans were brought over in the 1500s and had their identity stripped from them. Africans were not the indigenous people of Haiti. They were enslaved peoples who were indigenous to Africa. So if I were the author, I would have simply taken the word indigenous out of that sentence completely. Voodoo, the indigenous religion of the Haitian people. That's the sentence on page 1. If you're going to talk about indigenous peoples, the indigenous people of Haiti, were not African, so they were not practicing voodoo. It's just a fact. Within the same chapter, he goes on to say that hoodoo always ended up in drunken orgies, and that fetish dolls from the Congo always cause death and sickness to those within the doll's range. And he went on even in chapter 2 to mix Jewish mysticism and the Loa. Bruh. This was problematic because the Loa and Jewish Kabbalah literally have nothing to do with each other. Historically, and in religions like Voodoo and all of its sects, we do not work with the Kabbalah to understand our Loa. It is not in our philosophy. Jewish mysticism is simply not in our philosophy. The author houses the Loa under the spheres of Jewish mysticism. It, for me, felt like an erasure to the nations and the divisions within Dominican voodoo and Haitian voodoo, and even African voodoo. I felt like when the author did this, he erased voodoo tradition and simply replaced the divisions and the nations with Jewish mysticism completely by making it seem as though the Loa can be understood under the spheres of Kabbalah. He even went on to associate the Loa with certain planetary influences, which to me was just, like that's just not how we see the Loa in voodoo. We don't associate them with, astrological influences or even bring up the conversation of astrology within voodoo. We keep it as African as possible and we keep it, just traditional as possible. And astrology isn't a big factor or a big playing factor within tradition. We don't do a lot of things based on European understandings of astrology and planetary influences that come from European, understandings of the astrology. Off of just this, I completely just recognized that this was not a book that I would recommend to my friends or recommend to even my clients. It's just, it really just gave me like a very Wiccan vibe where, and this is no disrespect to Wicca, I have my thoughts on Wicca, but it just was giving very much that, where the author pretty much took African traditions and spirituality, and the pantheons of this spirituality in this case was the Loa, and completely mixed it up with other traditional viewpoints such as that of European astrology, Jewish mysticism, and completely just bundled them up together to make an understanding of the Loa. And to me was just a big mess. As far as I'm concerned, Hoodoo is a African American, spirituality. It's not a religion. And I know that it sprung or came alive after slavery. It centers around Blackness, similarly to voodoo in Dominican Republic and voodoo in Haiti, as well as, voodoo practice in Puerto Rico. However, a lot of its focus, as I've been told, is focused on conjure, root work, and of that nature. It's packed with an array of knowledge such as spells, recipes, and a heavy focus on working with the ancestors and guides or spirit guides, and sometimes for some people, working with Catholic saints. I know that there is not a huge focus on working with the Loa or the Orishas that belong to entire religions and entire different African spiritualities. The next thing that I would like to mention is the author talks a lot about astrological associations with plants. The author does not clarify on what the plants mean or why you would do a bath with these certain astrological influences. So he has a chapter, where plants are associated with Aries and Taurus and all of these zodiac signs, but doesn't really mention why you would do a bath with these plants, or what plants you would pick out, or which ones are bitter, which ones are sweet, and why you would do a bath under these zodiac signs. He doesn't make it clear as to why you would want to work with astrology and plants and that mess of information. And when I saw it, it really just gave me, that he pretty much just took that information from other books, other perhaps Wiccan sources, or other perhaps, herbal books, and took that information and just slapped it into this book. It didn't make any sense to me why that information was even in the book, only because it wasn't clarified what were the uses, of the plants. And also from someone that has been using herbs all my life, and especially in my spiritual practice, I know that there are just certain plants that don't mesh well with the energies of other plants. Some plants are sweeter, some plants are bitter, and you definitely don't want to go based on a astrological sign to take a bath. Malbrough also mentions in his book information on a lucero, which is something that is revered and honored in Palo Mayombe, that comes from that African spirituality. And I just didn't see what a lucero had anything to do with hoodoo. It really was just out of the blue, because lucero is an entire entity that belongs to, again, another religion, similarly to how he just started talking about the Loa, and that belongs to an entire other African spirituality. For those of you that don't know, you cannot just create a lucero because you wake up and decide to. If you are not a priest of Palo or do not walk Palo, you really have no business with a lucero. So I don't see why someone who potentially is just trying to learn about Hoodoo really would hear about a lucero, but hey. He goes on to give meaning and instructions for throwing caracoles, or seashells, which is something practiced by priests of Ifa who have been called to become babalaos. So I didn't see why that also was in the book. It's kind of like, again, like a whole just Wicca. It's like taking traditions from other practices and just slapping it into what he identifies as hoodoo without any respect to these traditions and, just following tradition. The useful information in the book is that he offers a rosary to the dead, a litany to the saints, the uses of different waters like river, spring, and rain. I have to say something about that. The bath recipes that he provided were not all that great, because some herbs are either hard to come by or simply impossible to find in the states at your local botanica. Based on the plant names that he provided, it really just gave me that, again, he took this information from a European book, a Wiccan book, or some type of encyclopedia of herbs and just slapped it in there. But otherwise, a lot of the ingredients for his baths are pretty easy to come by. He didn't make long lists of ingredients for a bath, which is something that I did appreciate, because yes, some of those associations to the bath definitely made sense to me, but a lot of the bath recipes did not, especially when he would mention herbs that are from Asian countries and plants that are from European countries. I mean, like, it's just like, if we're talking about hoodoo and this is something that is supposed to revere and reference, African American spiritual practices, I would expect that it provides information for herbs that are very local here in the US that can easily be found, at your local places. Something else that I also found very important, maybe, or, very useful, was that he provides the meaning of playing cards if you want to read with playing cards. And he also keeps the meanings short, which I found was pretty unique. From the information that the book provided, I wasn't excited to try out too many of the spells, so I really just did two things that the author provided, you can do on your own, which were 2 baths. I prepared 2 of the baths that he created, and only one really did something for me, and it was a bath for clarity. That was, all that I could say out of all the other things that really called to me to try. And the only reason I wasn't excited to try anything else was because of, again, the credibility of the author and really just the information that he was providing. It was too much of a European approach to Black culture and Black spirituality. It's like he just, again, took it all and made his own book of it to make money off of it. That's really what it gave to me, honestly. It didn't seem like it was very respectful, to many traditions. I felt like he definitely went out of topic. So I hope this review helped you guys understand why I gave this rating. If you guys have read this book before and you have a different idea, definitely leave your comments below. But I do not recommend this book for anybody trying to learn about hoodoo or African American hoodoo as an African spirituality. It's not useful, it's not accurate, it's a mess. Don't do it. Los di progreso, guys.